Begin the current Daf Mesechta Bava Metzia Daf Kuf Dalid. Begin the top line of the Amud, where the Gemara continues to explain the halacha of our previous Mishnah, which we just began explaining, of if someone makes a kablanis, which is the theme of this parak, hamakabel sadeh mechaveroi, which we talk about if like there's a type of contractual agreement that someone is going to take someone else's field and is going to give the owner a profit. So they're doing like a profit sharing. Two basic ways of arisas, chakiris. Either the arisas is that, depending on how much the profit is, the sharecropper is going to take 50%, 33%, or 25%, or chakiris, which is that automatically he gives the owner a certain amount of bushels as payment, whether he makes a certain profit or not. And actually, that's going to be the point our Gemara is going to make right now, almost like a comment on these mishnayos regarding if they apply by chakronis and or bekablanis. Today's Daf throughout the entire world. Some of these discussed in today's Daf are the Mishnah that we began on the previous Daf. Someone accepts a kablanis. So again, he's contracting to work on this guy's field, and then they're going to share the profits, and it's a beis hashlachin. The significance of that is that a beis hashlachin, it's not sufficient to get rain to get water from the rain. Rather, has a spring inside, and that's how you water it. What happens if yavesh hama'ayin? What happens if, like during the work, suddenly the spring dries up? So that the Mishnah tells us, it doesn't diminish from the chakranis, from the contract of how much bushels he's going to pay, even though he's obviously going to get less now because the spring dried up. Doesn't make a difference. That would not allow him to diminish. And the Mishnah, however, says, but if he said zu, so then actually he would be, and the Gemara is going to explain the reason for that. The Gemara also discusses Shma Ba'alma Amirlach. Now, why can't you just say that I just said the name? It doesn't mean I meant specifically this. It's just called that. Also, the next Mishnah discusses Hamakabel Sadeh Mechaveira V'Yevira. What happens if a guy says, okay, look, give me the field, I'll work it, and we'll split the profits, and he doesn't do anything. He just leaves it fallow. So Shama Naisa Kamaruya Lazas B'Naisna. We evaluate how much it could have made. The guy didn't work it, and he actually has to pay that amount to the owner of the field. Now, the Gemara explains the reason for this is because in the document he writes to him, if I leave it fallow and I'm not going to work it, I'm going to pay for the best. And actually, the Gemara gets into a whole discussion of what's called derish lashon hedyot, that even though maybe these documents are not written with the understanding of the Chachamim, or wasn't written with rabbinic oversight, ultimately that's the documents they use. And therefore, the Chacham actually now, almost reverse engineering, they now translate what do people mean when they say those things, and then we have many different examples the Gemara gives of derish lashon hedyot. And also, asmach b'likanya is the concept of that if a certain person exaggerates and he gives like this promise, which obviously he doesn't really mean, he doesn't think it's ever going to happen, that does not create a kinyan. So begin the current Daf Kuf Dalid. We had mentioned in our Mishnah that if someone is mekabel asadeh mechaveiroi, the beis hashlachin, so he leased a dry field. It needs extra watering. It had a well from which the worker would benefit, or it's a beis elon that has fruit trees, which the worker automatically benefits because it doesn't have to work on the trees. The Mishnah said, if yavesh ma'ayim, elon, if one of these two prize elements, either the spring dries up in that field or the tree gets cut down in the other one, he does not subtract his loss. Because Rashi explained, he never specified beforehand that he's paying more because of the well of the tree, and therefore that wasn't necessarily included in the rental. But if he says to him, I saw the beis hashlachin zu, I saw the beis zeh, then, if he specified this, then if Yavesh Ma'ayim Nixah Elon, then we would subtract his loss from the price of the chakiras. Now, on that Amar Papa, before we get into explaining the actual mission itself, Papa makes a comment. He says, Hani Tarti Masnite Kamaisa. He says, these first two Mishnayos, Mishkachasla, meaning these, we opened up Perek HaMakabel, we had two Mishnayos so far. So these first two Mishnayos apply, and again, the first Mishnah had mentioned the Mekabel Sad Mechaveiroi, Makom Shenagu, Liktzor, Yiktzor. We said whatever the common custom is, you got to do it. You rip it out, you cut, whatever it is. That was one Mishnah. We had another Mishnah of Mekabel Sad Mechaveiroi, Beis Hashlach, in the Mishnah we just described, that if, let's say, the spring dries up or the tree gets cut down, that you cannot diminish the amount from how much you owe the owner. So these first two mishnayos, mishkachas la bein b'chachrenusa, which again, chachrenusa is that you give to the owner a certain amount of kor a year. I say, I'm going to rent this field from you. I'm going to give a certain amount. So the mishnayos apply by that when bein b'kablanusa, or whether by arisus, by a sharecropping agreement, meaning by both of them you could apply the halachas of our two mishnayos. Like we said, if it's to be kaitzer, you have to be kaitzer. If the custom is to be oiker, you oiker. Because whatever you could claim b'kablanis, you could claim b'chakiras, like we explained why each one would not want to deviate from the common custom. Regarding our previous mission, is the same thing. When the spring dries up, if he told me that, okay, you're going to have to give me a certain amount of bushels for the sada beis hashlachin, so just like b'chakiras, when the spring dries up, if he says the zoo, you're gonna diminish the amount. So too by kablanis, if let's say accepted the profit sharing for a third or for 50%. Everything will be proportional according to what his loss is. You would be able to diminish it again if you said zu, and which Taisus points out. Even though really not everything in these two mishnayos really do apply, because the halach of kishem shecholkim bitvu, and Rashi pointed this out also in the Mishnah, that in the first Mishnah at the end it said just like they split by the grain, so too they split by the zmayrais and the kam. We pointed out all these different things. That obviously doesn't apply by chakirus, because chakirus is not a splitting thing. It's you paying the guy a certain amount. But Taisa says ikar milsa, which is the ratio, we mean applies bein b'chakirus, bein b'kablanas. However, that is the first two mishnayos we had. So although we use the word mekabel, it applies by kablanus again, which that terminology changes depending on context. In our context, it means sharecropping, and with chakranas. But from this point onwards, the mishnayos that we're going to describe, although the words are hamakabel, from this one, as Rashi says, I'll explain each one as they come. The isa bekablanusa, less bechachranusa. The ones that it actually applies by sharecropping do not apply by chakranas, which is a certain type of leasing agreement. Or the isa bechachranusa, less bekablanusa. So although the first two mishnayos applies to both of them, the next mishnayos are going to be either or. Again, that was a gloss, a comment on these mishnayos that we're having, that it's only this first two mishnayos that are by both of them. Okay, now going back to the Mishnah that we described him, Amalai Chakarli Sada Beis Hashlachet Zeh. So although we said when he doesn't say the word Zeh, so okay, it's your loss, he never specified. But if you say this, then if you have a Ayin or Niktzas Ilan, then you could be Menakal Min Chakura, you could diminish from the price that you promised for the lease. Says the Gemara, Vamai, why do you say this? Why can't the owner just tell to the renter, Shma Ba'al Ma'amilach? That's how it's called. But it's not because of the spring that I was charging you that price for the lease. So who cares? Even if he said this, yes, it's this Beis HaShlachin, but this Beis HaShlachin, this Sada Beis HaIlan, although the wording is saying that it has a tree or that it has a spring, but that's just what it's called. As the Gemara says, Milay Tanya, didn't we learn the Brayso? Someone says to his friend, Beis Kur Offer Ani Meichalach. I'm selling you an area of a kur of offer. So the Brayso says, Ava B'Shem Ba'ela Lesach. Even though it only has actually a half of a kur, Hikiyai, it's a valid sale. Why? Didn't he say Beis Kur? No, Shleimachal El Shma. He sold them what's the title that it's called. But Miskari, Beis Kur, this land, although it's actually only half, is called a Beis Kur. So to Karmani Moichalach, let's say, I'm telling you the vineyard. Even though there's no grapevines, it's a done deal. Shloimo is telling him what it's called. But Miskari, it's called a vineyard. Or let's say Paradis Ani Moichalach. Let's say it says, I'm selling you an orchard. Even though there's no pomegranates, it's a sale. Shloimo is selling him a name. With the Miskari Paradis, and as the Bryce itself points out, it has to be called the Paradis. So as long as it has the name, so Alma Amalei, obviously you see he could tell him, Shma Ba'alma Amalach. It's what it's called. Why can't he say also over here that, yeah, it's called a Sada Beis HaShlachin. It's called the Sada Beis HaIlan. But it's even without a spring. It's even without the tree. So Mashmuli says, like Kasha. He answers the contradiction. He says, "Ha, the Bryce that says this concept of Shema Ba'alma, that it doesn't need the spring or doesn't need the trees. The Omale Machker L'Chaycher. That was the seller, the owner telling the renter that he says, so the Beis Hashlochen, I'm going to be Machker to you." So then he could say, I was just telling you a name. Our Mishnah, however, was the Omale Chaycher L'Machker, was where the renter is telling the owner, as the Gemara explains, Omale Machker L'Chaycher, when the owner is telling the one who's leasing it, so Shema Ba'alma Omale. That's just by name, because he's the owner. But Omale Chaycher L'Machker, when the renter says it, he's not saying a name, he's kapeder, because he's particularly says, I want specifically Beis Hashlochen. I want if there's a spring, I want if there's a tree. That's one pshat. Rabbi Shloimy says a different pshat. He says, no, you could even say that both of them are, which tries to discuss, but specifically this, but it doesn't make a difference. It could even be if the owner is telling the renter. So how do we resolve the contradiction then? But our Mishnah, when he says this, so mechlal de koi begavaskin, it's obviously that they're in the property because you're pointing, you're saying this. So then Beis Hashlochen, why is he saying this Beis Hashlochen? Wait a minute, of course, this is whatever this is. You obviously weren't saying Shema Ba'alma to like define what it is. You were coming to say extra terminology. Rather, because the Kamali Beis Hashlochen, is obviously telling him that I want specifically that there's a spring as it is right now, and that's why the Mishnah said that, and you don't have this idea of Shema Ba'alma, it's even if the Machker, again, even if the owner is saying it, because the owner is specifying the words Beis Hashlochen, he's promising him as it has the spring, not just Shema Ba'alma, because you're here, you're saying that. So therefore, that's the difference between the Mishnah, and the Brisa, and why it's not a contradiction. We continue the halacha, the next Mishnah, continuing on this theme, the same wording that we're saying of Hamakabel Sada Mechaver, which if someone accepts a field from his friend, he leases the field, Voivira, but he actually just leaves it fallow. He doesn't plow, doesn't plant. So it says the Mishnah, Shaman Isa, we evaluated, Kamar Du'ya Lasses. Well, how much would it, how much are we assuming it would have produced? And he has to give it to the owner. So Rashi points out, as we said, that each one of these Mishnayos are going to be one and not the other. This Mishnah is, for example, bekablanis, meaning a sharecropping. He accepted it. It says, look, buddy, like you have a field, you own property, I'll do the work. We'll split it 50%, 33%, 25%. But b'chakranis, this halacha, the Mishnah would not apply, because what are you doing a shaman for? Chakranusa is that you made a certain amount for the lease. You promised him a certain amount. I don't care if you did work or not. You didn't work, it's your loss. You got to find bushel somewhere else. So this Mishnah, again, although they all have the same word, the Gemara, Rav Papa already pointed out that all these next Mishnayos are going to be one and not the other. This is specifically by Kablanis / Arisus and not by Chakranis. Rakapanim, so he has to give him how much it would have made. Why? Because this is how he writes in the contract. The words in the contract are like this. Im oiver, if I'm going to make it a bar, meaning fallow, I'm not going to do any work to activate it. Ashalam b'matava, I'm going to pay from the best. I'm going to pay you in full. And therefore, that's how we know that he owes him. As the Gemara tells us, Remeir would expound common person's terminology that the regular man writes without the Takanos Chachamim. He would darshan what their words are to say, what the Psakat Halach is. We know lawyers are very busy with this all the time, reading into the wording of the contract. The Chachamim said, look, this is what you guys write. Now, okay, if that's what you wrote you got to pay up. Even if nothing happened, you didn't do any work, you got to pay what it would have made. It sounds like we're in the Brisa. It says, this is the first of many examples. So in the contract, the way regular people write is right, okay, if I leave it fallow, I don't do work, so I'm going to pay from the best. That's example number one. Now the Gemara goes through now a whole long list of this concept of Darish Lashon Hedyid, rulings that are based on the wording that people are accustomed to write. Darish Lashon Hedyid, he also expounded the wording that Chacham were not mesakin. It's just that what people write, the Tanya, like in the Brisa, Yehuda Omer, he says, Adam may be korban asher al ishtay. A man has to bring a wealthy person's carbon for his wife, meaning let's say his wife is chayav a carbon because she gave birth. We know a Yeledis has a chiv to bring a carbon, or she had saras. So if the husband is wealthy, he can't say, well, my wife she has no assets. She's a pauper, my wife. And she should be exempt with the carbon of an ani. She doesn't own his assets. So the halacha Rabbi Yehuda is saying is no. The husband has to give a wealthy man's carbon for his wife. And so to every single carbon that she's obligated, meaning not that which she vows and she donates, what she's obligated, for example, a carbon when she was a zava, which is a certain type of a menstrual blood flow, or let's say an asham, or edwa. What? No, there's two concepts. One is that when he brings a carbon for her, he has to bring a carbon asher, and also that any carbon that she's chayiv, he also has to bring. What? No, one is that no, it's just saying that he has to bring a carbon asher and every carbon that she's chayev is. It doesn't say which one. It just says that I hear you say maybe the wording you could have said it differently, could be, but it's qualifying any carbon that she's chayev, like an asham or a chatas, where and this chiddush is even before he married her. He has to bring it for her, and this is actually the main point. Shakach Kaisaba, because he writes for her in the Ksuba, Achrai is to Islech Olai, that the responsibility that you have on me, min kadmis dana, even from before this point, even what was an obligation before he got married. So that was Rabbi Yehuda Darish and Lashon Hedyot, that even before she got married, because their wordings were min kadmis dana. Now Rashi brings a different gears of him Torah's Kayanim, that Amar Behuda says Lafikach in Patra, actually if he releases her, in the chayiv behen, he's actually not obligated in his wife's kabbanas. Shekeni Kesebes, like because she writes to him, Achroyin the Isili Allah mikabmas dana, meaning when he divorces her and he gives her the ksuba, and she still has a chiv of karbanas, he's not obligated in them because she writes for him in the receipt that she writes to him when she gets the ksuba, his kabaltik subasi. Meaning those obligations are not there anymore. It's the same idea, just the one is with the obligation the husband has to the wife of the ksuba, and the other one is the receipt. But either way, because they would write this, Rabbi Yehuda says, well, that's the halacha based on their wording. So to Hillel Zaken, he also expounded the common man's wording. Alexandria. Interesting. So the men of Alexandria, they would get engaged to their wives, gave them the ring. The problem was when they finally came to the chuppah, so that's for the nesuin. So boin acherim, others came along. Other men would grab away these kalas that are engaged to these other men. The sages wanted to make the children as mamzerim, because obviously a woman that has kedushin is already that asalanu has arusais. A woman is forbidden to another man, and that would make the marriage with the second man who grabbed away this woman into mamzerim, into illegitimate children. But Amlin Halazakin said no. He said, bring me your mother's ksuba that was written to them from their real husband on the day they got engaged. So Yevila Ksubas, when they brought their mother's ksuba, and he found that it was written on them, that when you're going to come with me to the chuppah, you're going to be for me a wife. Now, although they're just writing these common man terminology, but that shows that the kedushin was with a tanai, and that the kedushin did not take effect until they came to the chuppah. But these other men grabbed away these women before they came to the chuppah. So they did not make their children mamzerim as illegitimate children, because that means lamafreya, they were never engaged. Another example, Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, he also expounded the common man's wording. The time like learn the brisa. Shloimy Schwartzberg says, if someone lends his friend money, he should not take security through a shliach bezdin with a security that's yosim achayvay, more than the amount of the debt itself. Why not? Because the borrower writes this in the following wording. He writes, Tashlamusa the islach alai, that the payment that you have on me, kol kovel dichi. So what's this referring to? So actually, it's referring to, like the Rashi explains, if the lender returns the security for an extended period of time, so we evaluate the security, and he writes for him in the shtar that Yulucha kol tashlumen alai, that all your payments should be on me, lipara mimeni de mashkin zeh, that you could collect from me the value of this mashkin, meaning the borrower owes the lender money, but the lender is giving back, he's returning the mashkin. So he writes on now a new document that, okay, that you could collect from me the value of this mashkin. Now, if the mashkin was worth more than the debt, it would come out that the collection would be a shaloi ka'alacha. So therefore, you obviously see that the security can't be worth more than the debt because he's allowing him to collect whatever the value of the security is from him. So he's inferring from the wording that the security cannot be worth more. So the Gemara has a question on this. Time of the cost of lehachi. So you tell me the reason is because that's what the borrower writes in his receipt. But are you telling me that if he didn't write this, that then the lender does not acquire the rights in the security? In other words, the Gemara is asking a parenthetical question. Why did the borrower have to write this in the first place? You're being medayik lashon hadiyat. You're saying, oh, because he writes that wording, that means to say that the value of the security can't be worth more than loan. But why did he have to write this receipt in the first place? That, oh, you could collect from me the value of the security that you returned to me, because now he has the security back, and he's writing him a receipt that, don't worry, you could collect from me that value. But why does he have to write this? But Rabbi Yochanan says the following teaching. He says, Mishkanoi, if someone takes the security, and the lender returns the security, and the borrower dies, the lender could remove it, he could pull it off. Let's say the children are wearing these security blankets, they're wearing this, that was interesting, security blankets, or whatever it is, they could, whatever this, the security is, you could take it right off. In other words, what he's trying to say is it's not like other metalton that are not indebted to Baal Chayv, that, so we see, because since he took it as a security, he acquired it, so it's like his for collection, so why do you have to write this document in the first place? So it says the Gemara, to continue Tamid Beis, Ahani Ksiva, the reason why the writing is effective is Ligiroyin, which the document helps if the value goes down of the security where the borrower is using it, so then the lender could collect from the other nechasim like anything that's written in the shtar. See, right, the actual item itself, you could pull off the orphans and take it. But if it goes down in value, then you would be limited. If you write this document, this receipt, it helps for this. Okay, that was a parenthetical point. The Gemara had a question on that once we brought in that teaching. Now, another example, Rabbi Yisrael Darish Lashon Had, he also expounded a regular man's wording. The time we learned the Brisa, that it's a more interesting example. Rabbi Yisrael, he says like this, Makum shenogu lasis kesuva milva. In a place where the custom is to make from a kesuba into a loan. What does that mean to say? That whatever is written in the shtar of the kesuba, so they write these wordings, the din, the dunya, if you ever listen by the kriz kesuba by a chuppah, and this dowry, the hanelas le mi beinosh le beis bala, that the woman is bringing her from her father's household to her husband's household. So they collect from the husband, since the wife brought this in from like this nichse tzaim barzel, that the husband promises that he'll pay back everything when she gets widowed or gets divorced, just like a creditor has to pay up, like anything that's written in a loan document. For example, let's say they write in it, says Rashi, the way we write, is achrayis dono kabilas aloy. I take full responsibility. So if it's a place that they make a ksuba into like a milva, like a loan, so gave a milva, meaning that the husband collects from the father of the daughter, meaning his wife, whatever's written in the ksuba, as if it's loaned to him. So that's what it's like, because like a loan, like meaning when she gets divorced, she has to pay it back. So it's like a loan. But if it's a loan, means say then the father-in-law has to give him whatever's written in the document, like it's a loan. Now, if it's a place where the custom is lichvoil, where they evaluate whatever is being brought into the marriage, they actually assess it at double its monetary value. Now, why would they do such a thing? So it says Rashi, it's because of like a covered. It's like more dignified. It's more respectable to write a larger amount. So they write double the amount in the ksuba. Now, obviously, when she leaves, she only collects only half the amount. So therefore, a gaiva, so the chassan only gets from his father-in-law mechza, because although they're writing a large amount, they it's hyperbolic. It's exaggeration, and right. So there's both things there. There's the responsibilities that he takes, which is regarding giving back. He takes achrayas for. There's a dowry in the woman collects the ksuba that the husband owes. What? So part of what he writes her is that what your father gave. He gave or he pledged to give. No. He's giving. She bring into the marriage. Oh, she brought into the marriage. Bring into the marriage. So there's nechsitzer and barzel. So that's nechsitzer barzel. Yeah. So that's technically that belongs to the wife. It actually belongs to the wife. Where she takes it when she comes out. Right. So that's why we're calling it like a loan. It's like a loan. That's exactly what we're saying. That makom shenogalasik suba milva, so goiva milva. But that's what we're contrasting, and we're saying that if it's, let's say, lichvail, meaning milva would mean like it's a little bit. This is a little bit interesting example because it's the terminology just sounds misleading. But the main thing, really, what we're trying to say here in this brisa is that if it's literally like what you're getting, and yeah, it's like borrowing, and then you pay it back when the marriage ends. But in some places they double it. So again, this is why it's important. Why he's derish lashon hedyet about how they write it. If they write it, and this is what really Rashi explains this more, achrayis dana kabila alai. So then it's like the wording of a shtar milva. So then it's literal. And that's the Derish Lashon Hedger basically does. So fine, then the guy has to give whatever was written exactly. But if the minig malkim is to double, so then it's not like a loan, and then you'll only collect, the son-in-law will only get half of what it says in the ksuba. Now the Gemara gives some examples. Nahar Baloi, those people actually gabu tilsa. They actually only collected a third, meaning the son-in-law. Not like they placed like a loan that it was literal, word for word, 100%, and not like the place where the minig is to double they write double the amount, and therefore you only get 50%. By the Nabloi, they only collected 33%, a third, because they actually tripled the value. You're right. The shver, the tata get $1,000, whatever, in the ksuba, and it really was only a third of that. So obviously he only gets a third. Now, Mereimer migvina mishivcha. Mereimer actually collected also the shevach, meaning whatever was written, and the doubling, he collected that all from the father of the girl. So even though really it was only mechza, he let the chassan collect the complete amount. So my Rinla said, but by the time in the Bryce it says lichvol geva mechza. What do you mean? We know minig malkim is that, when someone bets, someone's bidding for aliyas, $1,000 mitzvah, I remember when I was a little kid, I was like, wow, these guys are wealthy. What's going on over here, right? We know it doesn't mean $1,000 the mitzvahs. It means whatever. I don't know what it means. $1. Right? So minig malkim mereta zay, right? So if the minig of the malkim is by the ksuba that you write double, so why was Mereimer collecting even the doubling? So he said, like, it's not difficult because that if the son-in-law made a kinyan from the father of the daughter, I mean his kala, so then he says he made a kinyan. So then you have to pay up the whole amount. When you didn't do an actual kinyan, if you didn't do an actual kinyan, so then you're only going to get what the minig malkim is, which is to get 50%. So the Gemara brings a story that Ravina Mishabach, Ravina, he did this shevach, meaning he exaggerated. V'ksiv lebrate, and he wrote to his daughter in the ksuba how much he's promising for the chassan. So Amrulay, so they said to him, Nikne minei demar, let's make a kinyan from you, from the master. Amrulay says, no. It's one or the other. If we're doing a kinyan, I'm not doubling them out in the ksuba. And he says, if we're doubling, I'm not making a kinyan. Because he understood, like we just said, the halacha, that merema, when you make a kinyan, you got to give, even though you're exaggerating like everybody exaggerates, then you're going to actually pay that double too. The Gemara brings a hu gavra d'amalahu. There was a certain man that he said to the people around him, which, as Rashi points out, he was mitzava machmas misahaya, meaning he was on his deathbed, and he was saying about his tirtzala, his nebuch, his daughter, he's dying. He says, "Havula arba meyazuzi lebrati b'ksubasa." I'm not going to see her by the chasna, by the chuppah. Give her 400 zuz to my daughter for a ksuba. Now, Shalach Ravacha b'reder of Avi lekamed Ravashi. He wanted to know when the father said that give the 400 zuz to my daughter. This liksubasa. So actually, our words in our Gemara is biksubasa, but Rashi says like liksubasa, but that's actually part of the question. That what did he mean when he said give 400 zuz for the ksuba? Did he mean that the writing of the ksuba or the collection of the ksuba? Because this was a place that the minhag makam was to double the amount. So the question was like this: did he mean arba meya? Did the 400 mean the inun, that that's what you should write in the ksuba? Which meaning that actually they are really, you should write tamni meya, you should write 800 in the ksuba, because he meant literally 400 should be collected. Oh, arba meya zuzi, or maybe he meant the 400 zuz of the ksuba, the inun mustin, which are really 200, which is to collect. He said to write 400, and that the chassan will only get 200. So which one is it? Is it to collect 400 and you're writing 800, or is it to write 400 and then collect 200? So Rav Ashi says, Chazinan, we see as follows. I amar havula, if he said, give to her arba meya zuzi 400 zuz, okay, that's the inu tamni mei, which is that you're going to write 800. I amar kesuvula, but if he said, write it for her arba meya zuzi 400 zuz, the inu mustn't, that's 200, because he said to write, which that means that the collection is only half of that. That's one version. You could tell me those say a different version. Amar Vashi said Chazina and said, let's see, he said a different idea. If he said this 400 for her ksuba, for the ksuba means to say that's for collection. Arba meya zuzi, that's 400 zuz, the inu tamni, which is 800. But the amma big subasa in the ksuba, which is to write it for in the star ksuba, that's arba meya zuz, that's 400 zuz, the inu masa, which is really 200. It says the Gemara V'lahi, actually, it's not the case. Loishna the amma liksubasa. V'loishna the amma big subasa. It doesn't make a difference. Arba meya zuzi, it's 400 zuz, the inun masan, which is 200, meaning it's going like the first approach, the first shot that we said, what Rav Ashi had said. The amar havulastama, until he says give a 400. If you're saying this 400 for the ksuba, he means the way it's written, and therefore it's going to be only 200, but you're going to write double, which is 400. Gemara brings a story. Hahu Gavra. There was a certain person, going back to the theme of our Mishnah, the Kabul Ara Mechavre, that he accepted a field for sharecropping from his friend. Amar said to him, Ima Varna law, look, if I leave it fallow, Yahavinu lach alfa zuzi. I'll pay you 1,000 zuz. So Iver Tilsa, what happened was that there was a third of the field that he didn't work, that he left fallow. Some in Nardoi, then people from Nardoi said, so really, halacha would seem to dictate that he has to give him tlas meya, v'tlasin, v'tilsa. What's all those tlas is 333 and a third, which is a third of the 1,000. He said, if I don't work the field, I'll give you 1,000. He left a third of it fallow. As let the little kids hear this, that you have to understand math. Right? He said, if I don't work the field, I'm going to give 1,000 zuz. Right? But he worked 2/3 of it, and 1/3 he didn't. So halacha would seem to indicate he has to give him 1/3 of 1,000. How much is 1/3 of 1,000? If you ever learn fractions, you'll know. Or decimals, right? It's going to be, how much is that going to be? 333 and 1/3. So that's what seemingly he would have to pay him. However, says the Gemara, Rav Ame says no. This is what's called halacha asmachtihi. It's where a person is reliant, meaning he's reliant that this is never going to happen, and therefore he exaggerates. I know the halacha is vasmachta like Kanya. When you're relying on something, you don't really mean to make such a kinyan. You were speaking in hyperbolic terminology. You don't really expect to do that, and therefore he doesn't have to give him. Tracy discusses certain places if it's something within his power or not. Something that's not really necessarily only that. Tracy does discuss that somewhere, like when they're gambling, he doesn't think, he doesn't know. But right. Well, the main concept. Right. Well, we don't know if it was extenuating circumstances that made him that he couldn't. Right.
Is that going to be a smarter too?
Right. That's the same.
Why are we choosing like 2/3?
Oh, that's just the story.
Yes, but technically a smarter is,
Yeah.
if for any reason something happened, you could
If I made a promise that I didn't think would be something that would happen, that's the basic principle of a smachta loikanya. But the Gemara, yeah, whatever. It's like he didn't think. Why would I make? I only made such a promise. You got him a sugar that makes it. I only made such a promise because it's never going to happen. So therefore, I make such a promise. But then the Gemara says, "L'Rava ma'ishna mahadit nan." Why is it different than the halacha of our Mishnah? Didn't we say in our Mishnah, "Im oivri v'lo eved"? Said that the guy promised him. He said, "If I leave it fallow, I don't work. At Hashem b'metava, I'm going to have to pay from in full." So why is it any different? Says the Gemara, "No, hasam leikogazim." In our Mishnah, he didn't accept any exaggeration. That's the basic human understanding. It's not an asmachta because that's the actual laws. But here he said such an extra terminology. He's exaggerating, and therefore that's going to qualify as a smachta, and the smachta lekanya, and therefore he's not going to have to pay him that penalty. The amount that he lost. If that's what they agreed on. That's usually what they used to. If that's what it is. If he didn't, then yeah, maybe not. Maybe he wouldn't have to pay that either. Now the Gemara brings another story. How who gaba the kabel R Shloimy. There's a certain person that accepted a kablanus to plant a seed, a field with sesame seeds, which are more expensive, more precious than wheat. But there's a problem. That's the pro of doing that. The con of doing that is that it weakens the property more, the ground more than wheat. Okay, so what happened was like this. So Zarichiti, although he contracted with him that he's going to plant sesame seeds, he actually ended up planting wheat. But of the chiti kashumshimi, but the wheat produced like sesame seeds, meaning he was so successful with his planting, and the price of wheat went up. Comes out that the homeowner did not lose out by this fact that he changed from what he was supposed to plant, and he made a profit actually in the weakening of the karka, because it would have gotten worse his property by planting sesame seeds more than wheat, and so he's actually gaining now because the profit is the same amount, and the field's not getting any worse. Now, Savra Rav Kana thought to say the menakile, we will diminish from the owner of the property from his portion the value of kacha shada'ara, what the land would have gotten worth had he planted sesame seeds more than what he planted from the wheat, and therefore he shouldn't take from the wheat the exact measurement of how much he was supposed to get from the sesame seeds because he didn't weaken the field so much because he planted wheat. So that profit of how much worth more is the field right now, we should diminish from the owner's portion. Over Amalei Rav Asher of Kahana, he says no. Amri Inchi, people say kacha sha'ara. In other words, plant the sesame seeds, even though it's going to ruin my property more. And that the master shouldn't get weakened. That to take less now and to have his family and him starve. So basically, don't take away because you're doing me a favor that my field didn't get as ruined. And we made up, I was getting a certain amount of money. I would be nachas, you would ruin my field so that I get whatever I need to pay for my family. and therefore the fact that there's a profit of the fact that the field didn't get worse, I don't want that, and therefore he has to pay him the same amount. Another similar story, Ahu Gaber, the Kabul R Shloimy, he accepted a field to work for sesame seeds, and Zarachit instead he planted wheat. Now, of the Chiti Tfeimen Shumshimi, the price of wheat skyrocketed, and he was so successful in this year of planting wheat, more than what it would have been for sesame seeds. So Savr Vin Lameim Ravina thought to say that Yohevele, that the owner of the property has to give him shivcha de beni beni, whatever that benefit is, that difference. Meaning, he has to diminish from his portion, and he should only take according to the value of what it would have been had it been sesame seeds that it should have made, because the fact that this guy changed, the worker changed to wheat, he's the one who caused the profit. So he should get that profit, and it shouldn't be part of what the owner gets. So Amalei Ravachim Mediftu Ravina says, what do you mean? Atuhu Ashbach? You think only the worker made it better? Arlo Ashbach, the land didn't make it better? It's his land also. And therefore he also gets from the profit. It doesn't all go to the worker. A related discussion, Nardai. This is actually a little bit more of a complex point. The Nardai say, Hi Iska. So if someone accepts merchandise from the owner, and he evaluates the value that it's worth right now, and he's going to take it somewhere else, where in Talmudic times, that would mean you would have to go to a place where you could sell for a higher price. Obviously, in today's times, it's all online, so you get a product from someone, and you sell it on some other website for a higher price, and you tell the owner of the product, says, I don't have money, but you have a product, we'll split the profits of your item. So explains the Nardai that this Iska, and this is where the common terminology we all know of Heter Iska, it's this Gemara that's discussing this idea, is Palga, half of its responsibility of whatever einsim happen are a milva, which means that the worker is taking full responsibility for half of it, like a loan. Upalga, and the other half of the responsibility is on the owner, like a bakadon, like a deposit, that it's the owner's half. And the reason for this is because Avud Rabban and Milsa, the Rabbanan made this takana that should be pleasing to both parties. The nichale l'loiva, that it's pleasing for the borrower, and nichale l'malva, and it's also pleasing for the lender. Like the Rashbam says in Mababas, like some Gemaras bring this on the side, that where there is some achrayus on one party, and there's some achrayus on the other party. So if all of it gets lost or stolen, it's no one party that's going to lose it all. It's going to be shared by both of them. That's how the Iska works. Now says the Gemara, Hashda Mina Palga Milva. Now that we say that half of it is a loan, if the quote-unquote borrower or this worker or whatever you want to call this guy, if he wants to take half of the value of this Iska and use it for his household expenses, which the Gemara is using the terminology, get a beer at the bar, shop or dummy, he's allowed to do that because it's quote-unquote a loan. And that's why he takes 50% of the responsibility of the losses. So it's a loan. You can do whatever you want with a loan. Rav Amay disagrees, says, no. Iska. That's why we're calling it an Iska. Iska from the word of business. The Amalei says to me, even look, when I gave you this business, and you're right, half of it is considered a loan, but it was only a loan le'asukib, it was a business loan. And the reason is because since you're going to put in the effort to make profit on your 50%, you'll put in profit in my 50%. It wasn't for you to go ahead and get a beer. And if you can't use that for your own personal utility. Another halacha, Rabbi Ida bar Oven, he says, V'im meis, if the borrower dies, and now the iska is the product is still there in this children's possession, so the half that's a loan, nasa metatlan etzabanav, becomes metatlan by his children, and therefore the original owner cannot collect from it because metatli diyasmi and not mishtabdi tabachayv. And again, here too, Rav Ami disagrees, says no. Lahachi karla iska. That's why we call it an iska, that it should always be around and that it should be busy to use it for the business, and that the owner could rely on it, that it won't be used for any other expenses, to tell you the amaze that if the borrower dies, that the lender, so to speak, could collect it because lo yasam etatlan etzabanav. it does not become metalton by his children, because since he needs it to be around, he relies on it just like karka. Because what's the whole reason why we say that metalton, movable items of orphans, are not meshubet to b'chayv, is because he doesn't rely on it, because movable things can be lost and shuffled and doesn't know where it is. And therefore, he's not lending it with the intention of collecting it, because the borrower could use it. But here, as we explained, it's from Lishitasai, from the previous halacha, that he cannot use it for personal utility. It's needed for the iska, and that's what it's called iska, and therefore he relies on it. And therefore, says Rava, that no, he would be able to collect his metatlan from the children of the loiva, and therefore he disagrees with that it's not considered nasa metatlan. Thank you for any time.